Massachusetts Municipal Directory of Towns and Cities that I'll make available to anybody who might like them after the meeting is over. And other communications at this point, just a couple brief ones, just so that we can get straight to the town manager's presentation. But I will go ahead and announce that yesterday I did go to a presentation of grants, and the land acquisition group had submitted for a land grant and a parks grant, and actually both of them were approved in full. So there's $500,000 in grants coming forward for the article that they're going to be bringing forward for the special town meeting. But that's the only announcement that I have. I don't know if anybody else has any communications that they want to share at this time. Okay, I know that Mr. Passios brought up that his preference would be that we allow the town manager to go through her presentation in full before we start peppering her with questions, and that's fine with me. So if you want to make note of the handouts, on the handouts of any questions that you might have, or just make notes, then we can address some of those questions when the town manager finishes her presentation regarding budget development, and I'm sure it will be an insightful discussion, and looking forward to it. And so we'll just go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to go through the steps of building the budget and more kind of an elementary level, like revenues, expenditures. So when developing the budget, we start off by putting in our estimated revenues, which includes property taxes, state aid, local receipts, and other available funds. And this creates a baseline to build the expenditure side of the budget. On the expenditure side, there's the operating budget, non-appropriated costs such as retirement assessment, cherry sheet offset charges, allowance for abatements, tax title expenses. The enterprise funds, which are offset on the revenue side, and other warrant articles with a financial impact such as stabilization, special purpose stabilization, OPEB trust fund, and capital are also on the expenditure side. And looking at the revenues, so the starting point on the revenue side is calculating the tax levy limit for the next fiscal year, and this is calculated by taking the prior year base, adding a maximum of 2.5%, per Proposition 2.5, add in an estimate for property tax new growth, and include debt exclusions for the school and pavement management projects to obtain the maximum allowable tax levy. Another source of revenues is state aid, and this is one of the unknowns when developing the budget in the fall. The governor's estimate is not known until the end of January, and the state budget is not fully finalized until the end of July, months after the annual town meeting. So that's a challenge when developing the budget. Local receipts is another category of revenue, and this is, we use based on historical data and maintaining conservative estimates, or otherwise we would need to justify these abnormal increases to Department of Revenue. And local receipts include motor vehicle excise tax, licenses, permits, fees, fines, investment income, and these are elastic revenues, so they're very dependent on the economy. Another source of revenues is available funds, and what's included in this category is MSBA reimbursement. This is the debt payment that will expire in 2023, as will this revenue offset. And water and sewer betterments, which fully funds the associated debt service for water and sewer debt. Sewer enterprise fund to fund indirect costs. Transfer from the artificial turf revolving fund to cover associated costs for the artificial turf field debt. And use of field free cash to offset the next year's capital plan, the regular stabilization account, the special purpose stabilization account, and the other post-employment benefits trust fund. On the expenditure side, when putting together the budget, The whole goal is to create a balanced budget using recurring revenues and balancing the needs of all the departments given a limited amount of funding. And the balance is to provide the best level of services given the available resources, maintain our assets, and put aside funding into our reserves. As part of this, we must keep in mind fiscal sustainability. When sending out the budget packages to departments in November, departments are given target budget numbers that include contractual obligations, inclusive of personnel costs, any other known contractual costs, and level fund their operating expenses. There are a number of non-discretionary expenses that are purely estimates in the fall, but that drive the budget. And those are such things as insurances. Worcester County retirement are two instances of those. Given the available new revenue that is known in the fall, the additional 2.5% of property tax and the estimated new growth, and the roughly 2.5% increase in local receipts, this is balanced out between departments after deducting the estimates for the non-discretionary expenses such as retirement insurance, allowance for abatements, and cherry sheet offsets. The police and fire chief put together long-term staffing plans to address staffing shortages to incrementally increase staffing. And these plans have been followed with the exception of in fiscal 19, there was a citizen amendment to the budget to add a second additional firefighter. And in 20, we were unable to add an additional firefighter due to a significant increase in overtime costs. So instead of adding an additional firefighter, we addressed the overtime line. So we weren't able to follow that plan in fiscal 20. The initial target budget for the police was the cost of an additional police officer, and the initial target budget for fire was the cost of an additional firefighter. Another cost that the town has committed to increasing each year is an additional $50,000 for the pavement management plan. The school and Monty Tech budgets were both given target budgets of 2.5%, which equated to $525,353 over the previous fiscal year. After we received the final figures for our insurance and the assessment charge for Monty Tech, we were able to add an additional $101,000 at the end of during the budget season to address the school budget, which brought it to a 3% increase over the previous fiscal year. The financial forecast also helps inform the budget by projecting long-term costs and the effects. At the end of last year's budget, I asked the superintendent to do financial forecasts as well to see what that would look like with her strategic plan and how that would affect the overall net budget. So we hope to have that incorporated into this year's financial forecast. So non-appropriated costs on the expenditure side include Worcester County retirement assessment, cherry sheet offsets, allowance for abatements, and tax title. Other expenditures include all the enterprise accounts, sewer, water, solid waste, and cable. And enterprise funds are designed to be self-sustaining accounts. So all indirect costs such as accounting, healthcare costs for employees, general insurance, those are all charged back to the enterprise, as well as their debt. Other expenditures include deposits into the stabilization account per our financial policy, deposit into the special purpose stabilization account per our financial policy, into the OPEB trust fund per our financial policy, and funding for the capital plan. So just to look at non-discretionary versus discretionary costs in the budgeting process, the top categories are non-discretionary expenditures, and that makes up about 25% of our budget. And as you go down the line, less discretionary would be considered education, public safety, DPW, and discretionary general government, land use, capital, and transfer to our reserves. So you had asked me to incorporate a discussion about free cash and how it fluctuates, how it's prioritized for use, and a history. So to define free cash for everyone and everyone at home, free cash is a revenue source that results from the calculation as of July 1st of a community's remaining unrestricted funds from its operations of the previous fiscal year based on the balance sheet as of June 30th. It typically includes actual receipts in excess of revenue estimates and unspent amounts in departmental budget line items for the year just ended, plus unexpended free cash from the previous year. Free cash is offset by property tax receivables and certain deficits, and as a result can be a negative number. So the Department of Revenue stresses that free cash as a non-recurring revenue should be restricted to being used on one-time expenditures, funding capital projects, and replenishing reserves. Free cash is one of the town's reserves, and a healthy free cash figure sustains a strong credit rating. The Department of Revenue recommends maintaining free cash in the amount of 3 to 5% of a town's annual operating budget, and it should not be used on the annual operating budget. The town's financial policies prioritize it in this order: maintaining a level of at least 5% of the current omnibus budget in the regular stabilization account, to deposit at least 10% of the prior year's certified free cash into the OPEB trust fund, and third, depositing funds into the special purpose stabilization account, and lastly, one-time expenditures, special projects such as capital. So this slide shows a history, 5-year history of use of free cash. And free cash fluctuates based on the balance of unrestricted funds from operations from a previous fiscal year. This can happen when revenue actuals exceed revenue estimates, and if there was an influx of unanticipated revenues, such as sale of tax foreclosures and tax liens, or unspent amounts in departmental budgets from the year prior, or unexpended free cash from a previous fiscal year. As I stated, the Department of Revenue recommends maintaining a free cash amount equivalent to 3 to 5% of the operating budget. Our free cash figure when closing out the fiscal 18 budget was driven by unspent amounts in the budget line items, mostly. A lower state assessment than local aid estimate due to choice and charter tuition for students going out of district, and the fiscal 18 actuals exceeded estimates by 1.9%. And when closing out fiscal 19, the excess was driven mostly by unspent amounts in budget line items. Fiscal 19 actual revenues exceeded estimates by 0.22%, or $88,000, and the overall overage from the turnbacks from the departments were due to vacancies in a number of departments. So unfilled positions. And
Sorry, can you get that line back? Can I just ask a question for clarity, because I just want to make sure I'm reading it. When we're looking at, let's just take fiscal year 2020 here, free cash appropriated, that 1.297
yes,
was free cash that was certified in the fall of last year.
no, if you add the two amounts, the 1297731 and the 214, that was the total of the free cash that was certified in the fall of fiscal 19.
Okay.
So that 214 falls to the next year. That was unappropriated at town meeting.
Okay, so we had, bear with me. In the fall of 2018, we had roughly $1.5 million in certified free cash, which was effectively unspent money from FY 2019.
Correct.
The appropriate...
2018.
18, yeah.
18.
Right. Right.
and then it moves into 2019.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Fiscal 18.
Okay. And we appropriated from that free cash 1.297.
Yes, yep.
Okay, and we intentionally did not appropriate the 214?
Yes, for it to fall towards the next year's free cash.
Okay. Out of curiosity.
Okay, before we get, I'd like to, if it's still related to understanding the numbers that present, or it depends on if it's, we're clarifying the information or
Yeah,
we're
okay.
still asking why.
No, fair enough.
Okay, so we'll just continue on then, because if it was a why question, then,
Just a couple more slides.
okay. And
Capital
then we'll go
budget.
back through, yes.
All right. The capital budget is funded at town meeting through free cash, raise and appropriation, unexpended capital, and borrowing. Funding a capital plan and projecting out 5 years for capital needs is a best practice in municipal finance. And a capital program is an indicator of financial health of a municipality. In fiscal 18, our capital plan total was 504 from raise and appropriation, 215,736 from free cash, and 54,476 from unexpended capital, and 480,495 from borrowing, for a total of 1.455214 for our capital plan. Fiscal 19, it was 923,235 from raise and appropriation, 582,731 from free cash, 171,781 from unexpended capital, $6,350 from premium reserve for capital, for a total of $1,684,100. So other impacts to the budget, sorry for the small print, I should have broke this down to 2 slides. But, so there's the non-appropriation revenue sources as well. So we work with our legislative delegation. We have an annual meet with them to identify priorities in the coming fiscal year. This year, there were 4 earmarks in the state budget that were a result of identifying the needs and communicating them to our delegation, which totaled $332,000 in funding. We also send letters of support or non-support for bills that would bring additional funding to the town, such as Chapter 70, Chapter 90, or that would create unfunded mandates or reduce revenue streams like ambulance billing. Other sources of funding include state and federal funding outside of local aid, such as Chapter 90 funding, the circuit breaker, family and community grant that the school receives, Grant 240 for special education, Grant 262 for the school, these are all school grants, teacher quality grant, Title I grant, and Title IV grants. And other grants, include the these are all current year, small bridge grant for Pleasant Street Bridge, which is $380,000. The Safer Schools and Communities, the school just received that this year, $55,500. Mass Trails Grant, which was $22,335. ADA grant for $7,500. We receive a number of district local technical assistance. It comes in the form of assistance, but there's a value to that. So examples of that are the ADA self-evaluation that has a value of $13,000, Green Communities Tech Support for $1,500, the ADA Public Rights of Way self-evaluation $22,700, Parking and Walkability Study for $29,500. The Senior Center gets the state formula grant. We also receive Emergency Preparedness Grant. That's typically between $2,000 and $3,000. A Senior Safe Grant for $7,218. And donations, there's a number of donations. Examples are the Eagle House supporters. They receive between $9,000 and $10,000 a year. The Council on Aging Gift Fund, those donations come from various groups, which are between $3,000 and $5,000. The Firefighters Association usually purchases equipment, which is $3,000 to $5,000, and Friends of the Library is another example for $13,000 annually. So I just wanted to highlight some other funding sources that supplement the budget. And that's all I have.
Okay, and then everybody arm wrestles. Okay, so I know that people have questions as we go through. So what I'd like to do, oh, we're already back to free cash, so I guess we'll go ahead and start there. And work our way back. As I know there's free cash questions, but I do, just on one question on the other, when you talk about other impacts to the budget, when you talk about the donations, et cetera, those aren't impacts to the budget, those are supplemental to the budget,
Supplemental.
and the potential impact to the budget would be if those went away,
Right.
that they pay for services that the town would otherwise try to find another way to pay for,
Right.
as far as those people
Yeah.
are
I meant
concerned.
to highlight on these positive impacts to the budget. That
Okay, so that basically,
Supporting.
That's basically everything under grants and donations. On that slide, yes?
yes. Yes,
Yeah, right, because if I understand it correctly, if we didn't get that money, we'd have to appropriate that money.
maybe.
Maybe.
Well,
Yeah, it would be in
Depends on what
the
money's
discussion.
going towards.
Yeah.
Right,
I
there
would
would,
say everything under state and federal funding.
and basically, what it potentially does is it helps to create free cash by not having to appropriate those funds at some point during the year because the services are required somehow, I would think. Only because I would assume that if the firefighters association really felt the need for that equipment, then they wouldn't be turning money back from their budget to the town because they would have spent it on equipment, likely. That's,
I can't, yeah.
you can't speak to that,
Yeah, I
but
can't speak to
that's one way to read it, is that the library would come in and ask for $13,000 in additional
The
funding.
money would be requested.
Exactly, thank you. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that. All right, so then we'll start from free cash, and we'll go back to the why question that we seem to be headed, I was assuming we were headed towards, so I just wanted to, okay.
Do you want to go back to this slide?
Yeah. So, yeah, let's, the natural next question around the question between appropriated and unappropriated is, why is there an unappropriated number?
It's also a best practice to move forward some of your free cash, so you have a positive free cash the next year.
Assuming that it could possibly not generate free cash, but you are guaranteed that amount coming forward.
Right.
Right, so the possible result of operations of the town in a particular year could be a negative net. And if that was the case, then we would be back in the situation of no money for capital expenditures, which is really what some of that is held aside for. And it used to be that we didn't have stuff to not appropriate.
Do these accounts bear interest?
Yes. Karen.
The
yeah.
stabilization.
With the general,
Actually cash, it's just a function of closing out your books. So it's not like we have $1.5 million that we can invest. We just have $1.5 million that's available for appropriation if needed.
Right, but in
It's not-
actuality, at the end of the year, that money is sitting in a.
Well, that money is
somewhere.
correct. Yeah, I mean, it's part of
And
it's
the-
part
Part
of
of the
the
budget.
overall cash that the town
And
has.
those accounts are bearing interest.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, actually, and we can have another presentation, I think it's before you were on the committee, we had the treasurer come and talk about what she does with the money and what accounts it's in and how far spread out they are. And that was also part of a debt discussion as well, whether or not we're ever in a position to pay off debt
And our
and whether that's a good
investment
idea. Right, the investment policy.
I also want to point, I provided, there's a few, just This is from a Division of Local Services, some of their best practice about free cash, reserve policies, and special purpose stabilization funds, so
I've
just
got some questions.
reading
Neighborhood.
material.
Right, well, how about, this, I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but I think what I'd like to do, and I don't know if this will get to where you need to be, but I'd like to start from the first slide and work our way through, so if people have questions as we go. Because my first question was on the first page. Until you vote me off the island, I'm going to...
Your prerogative.
This page?
I had one on that page.
All right, basically, I just wanted to, again, go back to, when you use the language non-appropriated costs, what you're talking about are non-discretionary, which means that you don't have any play with it?
No, non-appropriated meaning they're raised on the recap, so they're not appropriated.
Okay, you need to speak English.
Okay, so the recap, so they're, when the taxes get set, so those figures aren't, they're voted wholly at the town meeting. So the figure for the allowance for abatements is put in by the assessors. It's a number that they decide.
Okay, so your description of this is actually how it appears on the warrant for town meeting. So it's not appropriated within the context of the operating budget, it's just voted separate from, but it
Right, but
appears
it's
in
an
the...
expense.
Right, so, and I guess the reason why I was wondering if it was non-discretionary was because I look at retirement assessment, and you don't have anything to say about that, really.
No, we got the assessment, we can't argue with them over,
And
whether
the cherry
we pay
sheet
less.
offset, you're not even always sure where the offsets come from, so... So those are that's the state identifying what you owe based on what you, and then what you have coming from the state.
Yep, and
Okay.
those are assessments, which can change, the estimates due
Okay.
to choice in charter.
Okay, so that helps clarify for me then, because when I was reading non-appropriated, I was, are you talking non-discretionary, but you're not?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're also non-discretionary.
They're non-appropriated and not.
Some of them, yeah. So, okay. Mr. Passios, you said you had a question there.
Yeah, I just wrote a quick note when we got to, in the revenue section with the overview, other available funds. I was just wondering if you could expand on what that encounters traditionally.
So, the slide covered a lot of that, was the MSBA reimbursement, water and sewer betterment amounts, the sewer enterprise funding their indirect cost, the money that's taken out of the artificial turf revolving fund to cover the associated debt, all those.
I didn't tie the two together when we were going through it. Okay, that's fine, thank you.
You're welcome.
Which then goes to another question I had, is the debt payment will expire in 2023. Are we talking about MSBA for...
For that project, which was, I don't know when it was originally.
That's just the
Yeah.
primary, so we're still going to be getting MSBA funds
Yes,
for
no,
this,
just for that
middle and high
project.
school. So I just wanted to be clear that, like, people didn't think that money was going away.
No, that,
That means the
funding,
primary will be paid off.
the funding mechanism was different back then than
Yep.
it is now
Got
for
it.
MSBA.
In
They,
prior years, we borrowed all the money up front and then got reimbursed from the state. Now, we get reimbursed from the state as we're spending the money. So you borrow less and get your money up front.
All right, and just because I've already forgotten, this debt payment is excluded or non-excluded?
Excluded.
Okay.
Have you, before my arrival here, did you do an overview of kind of the whole debt situation as it more or less currently exists, and when those different members will be retired?
yep, that's
Yes,
part
and we can
of
do it
the
again.
budget, discussion when we go through the budget process.
Okay.
Actually, we can probably do even a more full one.
At some point, I think it would be
yeah.
helpful. I go back and look.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've heard it every year for many years, and I still, okay, now where was that one? Because I just forget.
The thinking that I've kind of done offline about this is it's not only the schedule of when debts are going to be retired, but how does that wash with the forecast and the crystal ball of, impending excluded debts for other school buildings or whatever, right?
Yeah, we have some good worksheets that we can plug in, to forecast out different projects and the effect, and that abide by our policy as well, because we have caps on percentage of spending.
Okay, any other questions on revenues?
Yeah. With respect to the process for revenues that are non-discretionary, or revenues and costs for that matter, that are non-discretionary, such as retirement accounts, such as cherry sheets, do you maintain a calendar that would allow this committee and the public some level of visibility in terms of when those numbers come to light during the budgeting process?
At every meeting, I report in my budget presentation of when we expect, so for when we expect to have the health insurance numbers, and it's changed fiscal year to fiscal year. Last year was the earliest we've ever received it, and it was really good news.
Right.
Don't anticipate that this year.
You get the bad news late and the good news early.
Yeah, but they do, in the fall, give us, what we should estimate for health insurance numbers. And then we know those by March, April timeframe.
And part of the retirement assessment, I think, is also anticipated. I think that probably was one of the accounts that some free cash was identified from because there were vacancies, so there were no payments to support those positions.
Right.
So, yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah.
What I'm getting to is, I think that there's, again, coming from the position of being sort of a lay observer in the last couple of years, I would analogize it to a puzzle where you don't necessarily know when the next pieces are going to land in the empty spots, but there is actually a degree of predictability and timeline in terms of when certain pieces are going to land in certain spots. And when you're observing casually from the outside, there's a pseudo-random feel to it, right? Where new information is coming in and you don't know when to anticipate it and when things are going to change or when a certain piece of information might affect something like a program that is on the bubble or what have you, right? And so my thinking around this is, would it be possible, just like we aim to create a more visible calendar whereby we know that the Parks Department will hopefully land on a recommended budget before it comes to us, before we vote to approve our recommendation for the omnibus budget. Just like our calendar of meetings in terms of how we're going to go about making our recommendation for the budget, there ought to be that level of visibility about, here's about when we expect the retirement account number to come in. And today that number looks like this. There's a potential degree of variance of 15, 25% or something. And that gives a level of visibility and transparency and predictability, not only to the members of this board, but also constituent boards like the school committee and board of selectmen and the public at large to kind of know when these things are coming.
Yeah, I think, we can.
I can, attempt to do that. Sometimes that changes, so I don't want to give false
I get
information
that too, right?
either.
Yeah,
so.
it's just it's best guess, right? It's like the weather forecast.
Right, yeah.
I think to get that information, I think it's offered when it's available, but you'd have to, from my experience, you have to attend almost every
So you
single
literally have to watch every town manager.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, I agree.
Right, and I think the other piece of it is that, and the reason for that is if we did have a calendar out there that said, okay, well, this is historically when we tend to hear it, and I think that that's fine, so that people will know to look for it.
But frankly, we're also made to
Sure.
hear historical renderings of how we got to where we are in the budget, which is interesting sometimes, but also equally difficult to follow. We live in a world of
living documents where we recognize that things can change and we can even track in the document when those changes were made. And I think that that's a worthwhile exercise to pursue.
Oh, sure. No, and I guess that's why, I guess my point was that, yes, historically, we hear about the retirement assessment anywhere from here to here. We hear about health insurance anywhere from here to here. The state will vote its budget anywhere from here to here. So, yes.
Part of the
Yes.
issue is that the general public engages the budget at a different time, in a different time slot. You know, every member of the public does. And like I made the comment about the Chapter 70 announcement, there is a group of people out there that will walk into town meeting with that information in their mind and have not heard the mitigating circumstances that were explained beyond that. So
Right.
they'll be coming in and saying, we got all this money from the state, where is it?
Right.
You know?
Yeah, not knowing it's in the budget.
Right.
Right, so, yes,
I have a few other questions.
yes.
You had mentioned when you discussed local receipts about needing to provide a conservative estimate around local receipts and the need to justify those estimates to the Department of Revenue. Is that a practice where the Department of Revenue is actually reviewing our budget process, or at what point would they actually insert themselves in reviewing your numbers, or would that ever happen?
That would be if we had a large increase or decrease in a certain receipt category, they review the local receipt numbers.
But that's after the fact, not during the budgeting process, correct?
It would be when we submit to get the tax rate set. Correct, right, Karen?
Okay.
Yeah, they'd want to know whether or not you have a big bump in,
Because then you have to justify, why are you increasing it 10% or 15%? Like, explain that?
Okay. My next questions are related to statutes.
okay. Any other revenue questions? Revenue questions? No, okay. Then your expenditure question, we'll start with you.
For my benefit and probably the benefit of people who are watching and listening, could you go into some more historical context in terms of the policy around firefighters and police officers and the intent to add one headcount per department per year and the associated costs associated with that? And where that policy lives in terms of how, under whose authority does that policy live?
I would say there's no type of authority. I mean, so when I first came to Lunenburg, I learned about the previous years where multiple police officers were requested just to get up staffing levels. It was never, they were never able to be funded, and probably due to, strict, tight budgets. So when I worked with the police and fire chiefs, we're like, how can we address this without, a significant impact on the budget? So we looked at incrementally adding, get staffing levels up to where they needed to be. And they created a 10-year capital plan or long-term plan for the police, 1 officer a year, and the fire department, a 5-year, 1 officer, 1 firefighter a year. So it was a presentation that was done, I think, at a finance committee meeting.
Board of Selectmen, I think.
Board of Selectmen.
Yeah.
And it was incorporated into the budget process.
So the agreed upon intent, short of the word policy, right now for purposes of discussion, is that the town manager's budget will include those positions for the foreseeable future up to 10 years.
Yes,
Agreed upon
unless
by
there's something like last year
Some
happened.
extenuating
and-
circumstance, unforeseen.
Yep, within the confines of our budget, yep.
Okay.
Could I interject something? Because it's very appropriate for the inability or the decision not to add a firefighter in the recent budget. And that is that, and this is one of my personal things that I'd like to learn more about, is that instead of just funding the overtime account to where it grew to, were there efforts made to find a way to mitigate the increase in overtime rather than just fund it and say, okay, well, that's it, we're just gonna have to eat that moving forward?
Good question, yeah. I mean, it had, the schedule and everything is all, dictated by collective bargaining agreements and the overtime rates, and so we'd have to look, I can't answer that.
It's actually, it's probably more, and it would probably be, one of the things that we talk about doing from time to time is actually reviewing the contracts, and I'm not sure if they're available somewhere so that we can get a sense of what a decision, an unintended consequence might be. Because what I didn't understand fully was, until a few years ago, that when a firefighter takes vacation or a holiday, the first right to refusal of the shift goes to a current officer. So you can't even go to a contract or a day person until after it's been turned down by a current officer, which means that every time you add a staff person, you're adding vacation and holiday hours for overtime.
At a higher rate.
At a higher rate. So, and because basically those are going to be more senior officers who are covering the overtime. So it's kind of a very much a catch-22 in terms of once the fire department is fully staffed, it's all going to be overtime, except for maybe coverage of fires.
I think that this leads to a
Sure.
broader issue that probably sits outside of the budget discussion we've defined today, but I think it merits a discussion that you and I have had offline.
Right, and that's what this is all
Which I would be
circling
very
around.
interested in pursuing, is perhaps part of even a different agenda item, is the effects of collective bargaining language on long-term expenses. And, collective bargaining largely entirely happens outside of the purview of this committee. It's negotiated by you, to some extent. It's ratified by town meeting through a largely ceremonial, that's the word I'm looking for.
Exactly.
Article, but
Which is mandatory by law to vote the first year of a contract.
I understand that, but there is, what I have not seen in my memory since the 1980s, I think, in Lunenburg, is a public discussion about the financial ramifications in the language of a new contract because of sick days or vacation time or what have you.
I think the only time that's come up was some posturing back and forth with the teacher's contract that's in place right now. That's the only time I've ever seen it. And there's very, from this side, there's very little control.
In any event, I don't think it's worth belaboring because I don't think we'll solve it today.
Yeah, no,
But I do think that it's an agenda item that we ought to discuss as a committee, with town manager in probably some detail.
Yeah, where I started in my mind with this overtime thing was, would it be worth an analysis of what would happen if we hired all of the firefighter EMTs or whatever we need to bring the entire department up to snuff where it really should be in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, rather than 10 years, based on the amount of overtime that we're expending every time we add one person. But it's kind of hard to balance that because you're saying that most of that overtime is created by each position being added.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is when the budget was amended in fiscal 19 to add 2 firefighters. I advised against that because I thought it would have a compounded effect, which in fact did.
It did.
So that's why we planned to do one a year. Both fire and police did a full analysis showing a long-term plan with all the effects of overtime, all the other budgetary items that when you add an extra police officer or a firefighter would include per the contract, whether it be uniforms or differentials, all of that.
Right, and I think at the time, the schedule would have been, it's almost like, rather than being put ahead of schedule, we're still on schedule. It's just that we did 2 in 1 year. And the overtime, came in. So it wasn't that, we're not behind, we're just caught up. So it caught up with itself. But it is definitely a good point that it would be good to have some sense of what we should anticipate from that. And even, like basically understanding what's in, forget contracts coming down the road, but historically, because basically all contracts are built on the last one. And it would give us a good sense of what's in there. So probably it would be good to take a look at that.
I have an additional or a follow-on question.
Sure.
To the incremental agreements that we have around firefighters and police officers. You had also mentioned that there's an agreement around $50,000 annual increases in the pavement management plan. Did those 3 policies, firefighters, the police officers, the pavement management, are there any other policy/agreements that the town leadership has agreed to around incremental increases that you are effectively obligated to incorporate into your budget plan?
I can't think of any.
I don't believe so.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any.
Yeah.
Okay. What I'm getting to here is, during the last budget cycle, I heard some pretty dire, as I would interpret them, numbers coming from the school department around class size, around space needs, around a number of issues. Just overall performance in terms of testing. And I'm wondering if there have been any discussions around an incremental get healthy plan for the school department.
I think that really falls to the school committee, it's not really, I did, like I mentioned, I had a discussion with the superintendent about doing a long-term financial forecast with what the strategic plan is, so it lines up and so we can see the effects. But it's not my job to, say, this is what you incrementally need to include. That's a discussion I think the superintendent and the school committee should have.
So I understand your point, but I think there's a very distinct difference between an incremental plan for police or firefighters or roads, all of which you can come up with a total budget for that department and add on plus whatever that agreed upon number is and submit that as, a total including whatever your cost increases are plus that incremental number within your town budget, whereas you only have the wherewithal to really get involved in the top line budget with the school committee because they budget the line, they're responsible for the line items of that budget. That notwithstanding, if there were an incremental plan, it would have the same effect of the top line of the school department budget that it has with the public safety budgets and with the pavement management budgets. So with all due respect, I think that you are an equal partner with the superintendent in terms of determining how we get there.
And that's why
everything that
we-
you saw last year was largely a negotiation between yourself and the superintendent. So my question again is that something that you would be willing or interested in taking a leadership role to help us determine what might be acceptable within the confines of the budget as a whole?
And I'll repeat again that that the strategic plan is what I was talking about, is doing a financial forecast of what that effect was. So that is, I think, a goal of working towards what those costs would be and how we can achieve those added revenue or added expenses.
Right, and I think the point being that basically, yes, we have the superintendent and the town manager working together to identify those things, and I think that the willingness of the town manager, the planning director, the superintendent to participate in an informational meeting where we're not talking about the dollars, but we're trying to get a sense of where you're trying to go before we get into the budget discussion, I think is also a good
Yeah, I mean, I'm not looking to
good way to
solve
go.
this problem tonight.
Oh, no,
I'm
I
here to
understand.
Share my thoughts and hopefully get a dialogue going so that we
Right.
can move through this process.
The
We
other
might be able to
piece-
Get to a place that
Right.
is in, is at a more progressive point than we've been.
Right, and I think the other part that's difficult for me as a member of the Finance Committee is knowing that there is no department other than the schools that has such a big portion of their budget funded from outside the town. And not knowing what that number's going to be, and knowing that it's been underfunded based on what the state is identifying historically is, last year, I honest to God believed that it was possible that they might come in with a better number, because I'm naive that way. But obviously, they didn't. But there's every reason to believe that this year they will, and hopefully they do. And I think that basically, the town has historically looked at, when that happens, the schools do better, because there was the year that, 3 years ago, that it was a 5% increase to the schools because the number that came in from the state was so much bigger. So for me, I probably put more emphasis on that than I should, because it is such a driver for the schools. I think it would be nice, again, from my own perspective, to, when we look at new growth, to try to attach that somehow so that there's a portion that's town side and a portion that's school side, and say, okay, so if the total budget increases 3.5% for everything, what are we looking at for schools? So should there be some kind of a target for the schools for the town services? And I think it's worth a look. I think it's certainly worth a discussion, especially around new growth, which was one of the reasons why I was trying to get a sense of where are the new growth numbers coming from? And so that was helpful to me to see the breakout of, single-family homes, this is what we have. So that we could potentially talk about that. But you're right. I mean, it is hard to, especially when the schools have a lot of unfunded mandates, and, like the fire does, the police does, and it's just that, which is the other driver for a lot of expenses that we didn't identify as a driver, is those unfunded mandates, like all of a sudden the town had to throw in $60,000 into stormwater. I don't know what's going to happen next year with stormwater, but no, but not to belabor it, but yeah, no, I understand your point, and I agree that it would be nice to get a better sense of what's going on on the school side, even though, as a committee, we're allowed to look at the top number. So that's
I think, I look at the numbers that we just talked about, the 50,000 for pavement management and the others, as earmarks that we've built into our operating budget. Okay? So part of the problem with developing an earmark for the school budget is that you cannot tell the taxpayer what that money's going to be spent on, coming from the town side to the school budget. We have no control over what that money is spent on. And that's a tough
right,
cookie to
because,
swallow for a taxpayer.
Well, I don't think that that's entirely accurate or fair, with all due respect. I mean, the school committee is an elected board of this town, and they bear the responsibility coming out of town meeting to execute the budget that's brought to town meeting.
Right, no, and that's, I think that you're saying the same thing.
Okay.
The only difference is, what Mr. Passios is saying is that we can't say that we want you to take this $200,000 and use it to have 2 new teachers in the early childhood unit.
I agree with you,
So,
but what
yeah.
I was getting at in my Q&A with the town manager is, in my view, the relationship with, although not administratively and reporting-wise the same, the relationship between the town manager and the superintendent / school committee is not entirely different than the relationship between the DPW director and the fire chief and the police chief, in that you can say,
Right.
we agree if we're going to come up with this incremental plan, that's
Yep.
where the money is going to go, and there is going to be an incremental increase in these particular areas that we identify.
Right.
And everybody raises their hand and says, yes, we agree to that.
Right.
And then when we break the agreements, well, we're accountable.
I just want to add something in here. In the discussion, what I heard was that the police and fire department came to you with data in hand and an analysis to support what they were requesting, and that the town manager is asking for the same sort of thing from the school committee and superintendent,
Yeah.
which I think is very different, because it's coming from the department, it's not coming from the town manager. In the presentation, the police and fire get their, 1% increase, and then the other departments get a 2.5% increase target budget, I think is what I heard.
It's, so all contractual
Yep.
increases for personnel costs, those are built in.
Yep.
And other contracts that we have that we can't break, those costs are built in. Everything else is level funded for those.
Which is the
departments.
2.5%.
Meaning level funded dollar amounts for expense line items. They'd have to justify any increases for any other.
So if you need more paper,
Yes,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
said, no, you said something about 2.5%
That was for local receipts?
for other departments. All right, so I'm sorry, I thought I heard you say part of the budget process when you were doing the target budget, because you give them a target budget.
That was for the school and Monty Tech, we're given a 2.5%
Oh,
target.
okay, all right.
Yeah,
So
that's
then
why
the
I have
target
it.
budgets for the other departments, how do those get calculated? Or they just tell you?
Nope, their target budgets were, so the police and fire were
Yep.
built in.
Yep.
As well as pavement management costs and all other contractual costs, because we have all those figures for what they'll be the next fiscal year.
Yep.
Those are built in. Everything else is level funded.
So there's no increase in the budget?
Right, so
from
they have to
previous
come
year.
back
Okay.
with, this is the
Okay.
justification for an increase.
right.
So again, though, it's putting the onus on the department to come to you with the analysis and the
Yes.
request.
Right, and that's also why the above target discussion that they present at the budget hearings is anything that the town manager hasn't already approved and put into the target budget. And that's usually when you'll hear the discussions about, I think the fire chief put in all of his positions, I think, or something. There was, but they weren't able to be funded. And that's, a lot of that goes to, like, are we able to change the projections on what we have to spend when they do bring those things forward?
I think your point is very well taken, and, a lot of it has to do with sort of the historical aspects and what's happened in police and fire and pavement, and, over the course of the last several years, and how we got to the point that we're at. But at the end of the day, a lot of the stresses that have been put on the school department over the course of the last 2 or 3 years were not forecasted 4, 5, 6 years ago. They've come on a lot faster than the school department anticipated. Whether or not they took the strategic steps to account for that or not, I think is open to discussion and interpretation. But at the end of the day, the budget that was presented, those departments, the non-school departments that we've been discussing, were between 7 and I believe 13% increases last year in the town manager's budget. And the school department was 2.5 until just before town meeting, where it became 3.
But I would point out, if you look at the actual dollars, if you take the additional revenue that we're getting for that next year, the proportion.
Proportionally,
Yeah,
I totally get it. In
it's-
actual dollars, proportionally, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And, 0.5% or 1% in the school department is going to have
Much bigger
Much
impact.
bigger impact in, dollars versus those other departments. So, but nevertheless, that's what the numbers say.
Right, and I think the other piece of it is that in terms of non-discretionary spending on retirement assessments and some of the health insurance costs,
Outside of the school department budget, that our school department.
right, so there's also that piece, right. So I think, but I do think that the town manager and the superintendent of schools have a really good working relationship in terms of trying to address these things going forward, and I think that's helpful. And I will also say that, yeah, for whatever reason, certainly just following the October 1 numbers for the schools, there's been a significant increase year to year that, as John has said, is like, it's unexplained. And it's not really clear why the numbers are going up as fast as they are. And it's also, you can't tell, well, you could tell if you really dug down deep into the October 1 numbers, what grades are affected. But that's the other piece that's hard. And I think that, again, as we discussed at the last meeting, the school choice numbers create some opportunities and challenges. So I mean, it's certainly an interesting press. But anyway, are there other questions?
Yeah, I have one more.
Yeah.
Could you provide some color in terms of the timing of the financial forecast, when that occurs relative to the budget season, and who reviews that?
In January, that's when it's presented.
Okay.
At the same time, it's about mid-January, same time as the capital plan.
Okay. And is that, I know it's largely driven from, current year spending and historical spending and revenues as well. Over the course of the budget season, are you able to determine or forecast how that forecast might change in the following year? Right, so for example, if for some reason we spend substantially more in FY 2021 on something, we increase 2 more firefighters and 2 more police officers, are you able to determine earlier in the process that forecast is going to change? Or is that something that's largely driven by the actual performance of the town over the calendar year previous?
I mean, you can update it as much as you want, the forecast, to reflect current conditions. So such as stormwater is a good example of those costs. We know they're not going to, at least for the next few years, while we have to meet the requirements of the MS4 permit, those costs are going to be about the same what we're spending now, and that was a lot more than we were spending in fiscal 19.
Right.
So, I don't know if that answers your question.
Or maybe extend it a little bit. You had mentioned that there were some assumptions that you build into the forecasted
Yes.
budget. Can you talk a little bit about those? Just the factors you consider, not the numbers, but like the things that you think about when you put into the forecast.
So there's projecting out like percentage increases for expenses or for salaries. Those are built-in assumptions in the forecast.
And things like tax assessments and,
Anticipated new growth.
yeah,
Yes.
right, like all of those factors, yeah, just so that's in the forecast, so if you're thinking about those things. And does it work as like a live document where you get a piece of information today, let me go plug that in real quick and see what it looks like in the 5-year forecast, or is it more of an annual process that you do the 5-year forecast?
More of an annual, it can be more frequent, but as you know, we're already in the budget process and developing the capital plan and making sure all those documents get out, and then it's right into budget season, and there's a lot of time that goes into that, so it could be updated more frequently.
I guess what I'm getting to here is that I think from a calendar perspective, at the beginning of budget season, which for the sake of discussion, let's say is January, right? We're getting into a 1-year point of view, right? A 1-year focus in terms of we're thinking about what is the budget going to look like for fiscal year 2021, starting in January. and a financial forecast, which is a 5-year forecast, coming out at the same time, I'm not sure is getting the appropriate level of attention or discussion or consideration, which is far more strategic in nature, right? And so my just thinking here is that perhaps that would be a more appropriate discussion in June or July rather than January. So coming out of the budget season, you know, recognizing the fact that none of us want to be meeting here every week during the summer, but, you know, that is something that maybe the finance committee could take a look at and think about more strategically when there's time and attention available to do that kind of thing, rather than the rush for the annual budget.
Yeah, actually, that might be a good August project, only because we have to do it in January. And it has to be part of the budget process, but it would be, you're right, it would be good to be able to take a look at over 5 years what the effects of the current year budget do and what potential, so that we can look at the different. So actually, it may just be taking the one.
Some aspects of it on an ad hoc basis this year, frankly.
Sure.
Right? But not.
No, right, but I'm also understanding that, yeah, we don't sit down and really take a look at, all right, so how does this budget, as we're approving it, this is what it's going to look like in 5 years, but we don't say, okay, 2 years ago, this was where we were, and this is where we were projecting we were going to be, and, you know, and what were the things that made the difference there, and that might be an interesting discussion to have, if only to help us have a perspective on what it is that you're presenting. You live it, I mean, you live it, you breathe it, you know, and the projections that you're doing are based on all of those things that come into developing the budget, and you have a sense going forward of, as of today, in 5 years, if all things being equal, and all, okay, so within this period of time, we don't have to put the additional $50,000 into the pavement management plan anymore because we hit the goal. Not that I have any clue how long that's going to take, but I don't remember. But basically, I know the goal was $1 million, and I don't know that Jack's going to come back and want to increase that when we finally hit the goal. But you know, but that was one of the agreements that we made in order when we went to the townspeople and said, you know, we're going to do excluded debt. But if we do this, then this is the payoff down the road. So I think that to that extent, I think it would be really good to have that type of discussion, and maybe after the budget is, maybe you're right, probably after the budget is set, it would be interesting to take a look at what this means for going forward. I just know that by the end of town meeting, I can't look at them anymore. Yeah. But that's also because I've just finished my budget at work too, so I'm a little bit. But anyway, I'm sorry. Any other questions on any of the information presented? All right, I'd invite any questions from the public if there are, and there are no questions from the public related to the presentation. Okay. Then, thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that we'll come back to you for more. And again, actually, the next agenda item is that we will be having the joint meeting presentations on October 29th. It's Tuesday evening. We haven't set the time yet. I'm sure that we'll be having that discussion about what time that will go. That will be at the auditorium. That will be the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen, and the School Committee. And allowing an opportunity for questions and answers, but really just to get some fodder for discussion for each of our committees going down the road and preparing for the future.
Is there any discussion on what the actual setup at that meeting is going to be?
Actually, if there's something that you're looking for, I will tell you that basically what I've presented to them was what I presented to you, was that each of the three speakers have an opportunity to talk in terms of where we are, how we got here, and where we anticipate we want to go. And then what are some of the drivers out there that are causing us to be where we are and where we think we're going to go. And that would include the discussion or the the information around, okay, if we have 125 houses going in, you know, like, what's the potential effect on the town services that I might be feeling? So it would be a presentation, an opportunity for questioning from the committees. And then we finish up the presentations, and then the public is invited to have questions of any of the presenters. But the format is strictly question and answer. We're not looking for discussion at that night.
Okay, so basically, we'll have a podium for the speakers. The committees and/or commissions will be seated probably towards the front of the auditorium, but not at individual tables or anything like that?
Right.
On the stage or anything?
Right, the picture that I had in my head.
Visualize what we're going to have for a
What I was picturing in terms of the setup was that the chairs of each of the committees participating would be at the front, and I'm responsible for you guys. So behave. Behave. But basically, it would be, in terms of just shepherding questions, it would be, you know, if the chairperson Soroka had somebody from the school committee that wanted to ask a question of Heather, that they call on their committees and they just manage their committee questions. And then that way, it's hopefully easier to keep an eye on who's got a question.
Right, I guess the only question is, that's fine, that moderates that part of the question
Right.
and answer, but who's going to moderate the section where you go to the general public to ask questions of the speakers?
That I don't know. I would probably assume that it could be the Board of Selectmen chair. It could be the Finance Committee chair. It could be any one of the chairs, I think. That would be my preference, would be that it just stay clean that way, that it's being sponsored by the, unless, well, I can't imagine inviting Tim Murphy, but there's no, you know, he probably would want the night off.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he's a member of the public, so as a member of the public, he's invited, but I don't know that he would be happy to come since there's no food in the auditorium. So, but...
I mean, that was where my thought process was coming
Right.
from. You know, town moderator is usually the moderator of public meetings.
Right.
If there's not a clear person who runs the meeting.
Yeah, I think
But-
because it's not a
And I'm not
meeting.
saying we need to
Right,
have that.
right, and I think that basically my sense of it is that it's not a meeting. We're not going to discuss with each other. It's just, you know, we'll get some information, we'll all have the same opportunity to get the same information, and from the perspective that we might not have asked if we were, you know, like, but somebody from the school committee might ask a question, then it was, oh, okay, there's an interesting way to think about that.
And finally, from open meeting law perspective, we're all going to have to
We'll all have to post.
post meetings.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I believe that there's a quorum from every committee, so that was the only reason why we said yes to that night. There was a quorum from every committee, the auditorium was available, and that was the one night that the 3 presenters were available, so it was like, okay, let's just go for it and see what happens. And, you know, and it may just be that members of the committee are the only ones that you know, attend, but I still think it's a good opportunity to hear some information. So that's it on that, unless anybody had any other way that they thought that this should go.
Thank you for your diligence in putting this together. I know it has not been easy
Well, it's
making
not,
this happen.
well, it's not easy from a logistics perspective, but I have to say I've had complete cooperation from everybody, and that's been very helpful. Even people that weren't sure it was a good idea, but it would be, yeah, all right, let's give it a go and see what happens, but,
Throw it at the wall and see what sticks.
yeah, as long as nobody throws anything at me, then I'm fine with it. So that's that on the October 29th meeting. Does anybody have any reports from any committees or departments? Okay.
The school committee met on the 18th. I was traveling and unable to attend the meeting, but I did watch it on YouTube. Most of the meeting was taken up by the principals presenting both their school improvement plans, which is I believe, an annual presentation that they make to the school committee, as well as their regular monthly building reports to the school committee. And being the beginning of the school year, it was fairly time-consuming. One thing that is notable is that the high school is going through an accreditation process this year, which is going to take up a considerable amount of time. resource in the high school to go through that process. There was not a budget update, as had been previously alluded to in their meeting earlier in the month, and then I had reported 2 weeks ago. That did not happen. However, Mr. Londa, the facilities director, did present a forecast of sorts to talk about capital needs that he's anticipating for the school department over the course of the next several years. And that actually kind of just to make everybody aware, there's still a lot of looming expenses around Turkey Hill that I think are likely to affect the capital planning considerably over the course of the coming years. And there's ultimately a decision that, some sort of financial analysis will have to be made about the long-term viability of that building. Is it something that we do want to submit for a substantial overhaul or replacement of that building at some point in the next 5 to 10 years? I believe there's a time horizon associated with that. And in my mind, one of the questions that happens is, if you ever replace that building, what do you do with the kids while you're doing it? And so just thoughts that have been generated out of these meetings. The only thing that happened from an actual financial transaction was there was a line item transfer in the amount of about $450 from office supplies in the high school to educational supplies. As it turns out, the art department has enrolled more students in classes over the course of the last year than was anticipated, and there's a need for additional art supplies that hadn't been budgeted. But where they took the money, interestingly, was from office supplies in the high school, which, as I seem to recall, was a line that had been reduced several times over the past previous years as well. So I would anticipate that that's an area of need that we're going to have to consider, or the school department will have to consider in the next year.
Okay, thanks. Any questions? No? Okay. No other okay. Minutes. Everybody have an opportunity to read the minutes?
Yes.
Okay. And
The only question I came up with, and I intended to email you, and I did not get a chance, the last couple of weeks has been pretty hectic for me, is that my motion to accept the minutes, I have in the back of my mind that the actual motion was to accept them as amended.
Fair point.
Okay.
And I can make that change, because I did make a change to a couple of lines in that.
Right, is that the set that
So-
my comment from a previous meeting
Yeah,
is inserted?
so the background on that, though, was those amendments have been incorporated into the printed version
At the
that
meeting.
I submitted to the town clerk following the meeting, with one exception, which was my spelling of the word liaison, if you recall, which I made a line item change to I literally wrote it in. So I'm not sure that that's
So technically, what we were voting on were the minutes that had already been amended.
right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any need to.
And as I
Okay.
mentioned- As I mentioned on my way in, I have been printing these. They're sitting on my printer at home. So
Yep.
assuming there are no other amendments, I will print and return tomorrow.
They look fine to me.
I will accept a motion.
So move.
A motion to approve the minutes of,
Motion to approve the minutes
What was the
of
date?
September 12th.
12th, 2019.
I have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so those are all set. Thank you. Again, they were a good reminder, and obviously a needed reminder, since I completely misread a whole, or mistook a whole portion of the meeting. Do we have a town manager or financial officer report? We don't. Okay. Do we have a public comment from members of the public? We have a public comment from a member of the public.
Is that microphone on?
Hi, Rhonda Licio, yep, it's green. 181 Reservoir Road. I just have a quick comment regarding the discussion of the police and fire departments earlier in the incremental plan to increase them. I couldn't have been more thrilled when the town manager came aboard and addressed the need to increase the staffing levels, which were neglected for years. So I totally supported it. I publicly supported it. And I also supported the increase of the 2 firefighters because that allowed us to have 24-hour coverage, even though the town manager didn't recommend it. Now, to me, 24-hour coverage for your EMTs and firefighters is very important. That is a service that anyone in our town could need at any moment. So I will continue to fight in support of those positions being added as planned. And as a member spoke about, these were well-documented needs. And for years, I watched the school budget increase 5%, 5.5%, 4%. And when you're talking about a fire and police department, I don't think either one, I couldn't pull it up on my phone, but they're definitely below $2 million apiece. So this is something I will definitely continue to support. And to me, it's almost, the cost is not the important thing. So, thank you.
Okay. No other any public comment from the committee? No public comment from the committee. Then, all right, so to get my head straight, October 3rd, we're going to meet. 6:30?
October 3rd.
Because the,
It's 6:30 in the minutes, I believe.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, and I had
It's on my calendar.
six,
training is at 7.
right, because the training was at 7.
Did we set it for 6 or 6:30?
I had thought we set it for 6, and that's why I put it on the agenda.
It could be. I've looked at a number of agendas and minutes and things in the last 48
Sure.
hours, so I probably picked up somebody else's start time.
I will be late for that, unfortunately, because I've got to work.
Well, the only thing on the agenda, and I'm not anticipating that we're televising it or anything, because it's gonna be quick, and it's really just to be able to receive the warrant articles, so that we can have a quick look.
Heads up before we go.
Heads up before we do the public hearing the following week. So,
It was 6:30 in the minutes.
no, I knew it was 6:30 in the minutes.
But it could
I have
directly
6
out of the
o'clock.
discussion, so.
If it came directly out of the discussion, then that's fine. We can do it at 6:30, but we'll only have 15 minutes, because then we have to, like scoot over to the senior center so that we can get,
How about if I make a motion that we amend that start time to 6 PM?
will we have a quorum at 6 PM?
I can make,
Yeah, I'm available.
Okay, and you'll be late,
can't.
and we don't know about that,
From
John.
the sound of it, it sounds like I'm going to miss the whole thing, so.
Oh, all right.
If it's only going to take 15 minutes, that's
well,
about how late I'm going to be.
It might be a half hour, 45 minutes. I mean, basically,
More than, yeah.
it depends on how long is the warrant gonna be?
3, 4.
It's up to 18.
Oof, okay, so it'll be longer than 15 minutes. All right, so,
and why again do we not have 3 town meetings a year?
well, I can tell you,
No, never mind, we've been through that.
What time is it?
I was on that charter review committee, and okay. So anyway, all right, so I will accept, do I have to accept a motion to meet at 6? Because I put it on the agenda. I can just tell you that we're going to meet at 6. All right, we're meeting at 6 o'clock on
Yeah.
October 3rd, as the agenda reads. And again, that's not going to be televised. We'll just do that and then go to the training. October 10th is going to be the public hearing on the special town meeting warrant. I expect it's going to be a long night if we already have 18 articles. Some of them probably involve money, so,
Do you know how many are pertinent to the finance committee at this point? Do you have any idea?
Probably less than half.
less than half.
It's still a lot.
It is a lot, and I think the other, it's a lot, and,
Some of it's interpretation too, is whether you think it's a financial
Yeah,
impact or
right.
not.
and we have to make that call at that time. And then basically what'll happen at the hearing, will we have time to, at a meeting after that, to make our recommendations, or will we have to do it that night in order to get it in the warrant?
Selectmen have to sign the warrant on October 15th,
So
which
we
is the
wouldn't have
following
no-
Tuesday, and it gets sent to the printer the next day.
So, all right, so we have to make our
Not really.
recommendations that
Yeah.
night, okay. That'll be interesting, so, and, all right, and since it's a public hearing, we can't do the recommendations until after all of the warrant articles have been heard that there's a presenter for, so I was just thinking in my mind that we could take it as each one was presented, we could take up our recommendation, but I don't think we can vote in the middle of the public hearing, can we? Or do we have to close the public hearing?
To work well
Usually you close
last
the
time.
public hearing and then do the recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know usually we do, I just want to know if we have to.
That's almost procedure, I think, isn't it?
I mean, that's how you've done it, is at the end, I believe. But last time John wrote up something to make it run a little smoother.
I was just about to say, I'm gonna make that grid that John did,
Yes.
to keep track of the decisions. and
Right.
put it to town hall.
He did the grid, but the grid, I believe we didn't fill it in until we got to the end of the meeting. I think we went
Just
through
can't remember.
each of the, no, I'm sure that we did. I'm sure that we closed the public hearing, and then we voted on our recommendations, and then we just moved quickly through them. I guess on the third, I will check to find out if we have to do it that way, or if we can. I don't know that we can vote during
Yeah,
a public
and-
hearing.
And I think it's prudent to wait to the end because there may be discussion that I don't know what.
That we might have
are.
discussion
That-
among
that
ourselves,
might
right.
overlap
Anything
from
that
one article to the
stipulates it.
next and change our mind on what we
Yeah.
want to do ultimately. Either wait till town meeting.
Yep.
To make a recommendation, so on and so forth. So
Right.
I really think we need to get through all of them.
Right, and our, basically, our options are going to be to vote to recommend, vote to,
No financial impact.
And
No financial
Defer to
impact,
town
vote to
meeting.
recommend, vote to
To be
not
given at town
recommend,
meeting.
or wait till town meeting.
vote to not recommend. We do not
Or wait till town
wait for town meeting.
For more information.
I always get lost on the language around the
Because
vote
what
to
is
say
that?
no.
Five options, four options?
Four.
Four options.
But I know that you had talked about language last time, so I was, what, the language that should appear, so if you want to refresh me on that, that would be really helpful.
it was in last year's warrant booklet too, the annual town meeting.
Yeah.
It was written in there.
Yep.
What each meant.
Take a peek, I still have it,
Yeah.
in my box in the basement.
But I
Okay.
could, yeah, I'll forward that in advance.
Then if nobody has anything else on any of these items, then I will accept a motion to adjourn at 8:28.
So move. One way or the other.
Okay, thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
I wasn't sure that anybody would say no, so, thank you.
No, I want to talk to them.